So good afternoon, good morning, bonjour, ladies and gentlemen. The Vice President, who is with us in audio, and I are very pleased to welcome you to our press conference. We will now report on the outcome of today's meeting of the Governing Council, which was also attended by the Commission Executive Vice President, Mr. Valdis Dombrovskis. The euro area is facing an economic contraction of a magnitude and speed that are unprecedented in peacetime. Measures to contain the spread of the coronavirus, COVID-19, have largely halted economic activity in all the countries of the euro area and across the globe. Survey indicators for consumer and business sentiment have plunged, suggesting a sharp contraction in economic growth and a profound deterioration in labour market conditions. Given the high uncertainty surrounding the ultimate extent of the economic fallout, growth scenarios produced by ECB staff suggest that euro area GDP could fall by between 5 and 12% this year, depending crucially on the durations are gradually lifted. These scenarios foresee a recovery in economic activity, although its speed and scale remain highly uncertain. Inflation has declined as a result of the sharp fall in oil prices and slightly lower HICP inflation, excluding energy and food. The decisive and targeted policy measures that we have taken since early March have provided crucial support to the euro area economy and especially to the sectors most exposed to the crisis. In particular, our measures are supporting liquidity conditions and helping to sustain the flow of credit to households and firms, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, and to maintain favourable financing conditions for all sectors and jurisdictions. We welcome the measures taken by euro area governments and the European institutions to ensure sufficient healthcare resources and to provide support to affected companies, workers and households. At the same time, continued and ambitious efforts are needed, notably through joint and coordinated policy action to guard against downside risks and to underpin the recovery. In line with our mandate, the Governing Council is determined to continue to support households and firms in the face of the current economic disruption and heightened uncertainty in order to safeguard medium-term price stability. Accordingly, the Governing Council decided today to further ease the conditions on our targeted long-term refinancing operations, also known as TLTRO III. Specifically, we decided to reduce the interest rate on TLTRO III operations during the period from June 20 to June 21st to 50 basis points below the average interest rate on the Eurosystem's main refinancing operations prevailing over the same period. Moreover, for counterparties whose eligible net lending reaches the lending performance threshold, the interest rate over the period from June 20 to June 21st will now be 50 basis points below the average deposit facility rate prevailing over the same period. We also decided on a new series of non-targeted pandemic emergency longer-term refinancing operations that we will call PELTROs to support liquidity conditions in the euro area financial system and contribute to preserving the smooth functioning of money markets by providing an effective liquidity backstop. The PELTROs consist of 7 additional refinancing operations commencing in May 2020 and maturing in a staggered sequence between July and September 2021, in line with the duration of our collateral easing measures. They will be carried out as fixed-rate tendered procedures with full allotment, with an interest rate that is 25 basis points below the average rate on the main refinancing operation prevailing over the life of each PELTRO. Further details on the amendments made to the terms of TLTRO 3 and on our new PELTROs will be published in dedicated press releases this afternoon at 3:30 Continental European Time. Since the end of March, we have been conducting purchases under our new Pandemic Emergency Purchase Programme, PEP, which has an overall envelope of 750 billion euros to ease the overall monetary policy stance and to counter the severe risks to the monetary policy transmission mechanism and the outlook for the euro area posed by the coronavirus pandemic. These purchases will continue to be conducted in a flexible manner over time, across asset classes and among jurisdictions. We will conduct net asset purchases under the PEP until the Governing Council judges that the coronavirus crisis phase is over, but in any case, until the end of this year. Moreover, net purchases under our asset purchase programme will continue at a monthly pace of 20 billion, together with the purchases under the additional 120 billion euros temporary envelope until the end of the year. We continue to expect monthly net asset purchases under the APP to run for as long as necessary to reinforce the accommodative impact of our policy rates and to end shortly before we start raising the key ECB interest rates. We also intend to continue reinvesting in full the principal payments from maturing securities purchased under the APP for an extended period of time, past the date when we start raising the key ECB interest rates, and in any case, for as long as necessary to maintain favourable liquidity conditions and an ample degree of monetary accommodation. In addition, we decided to keep the key ECB interest rates unchanged. We expect them to remain at their present or lower levels until we have seen the inflation outlook robustly converge to a level sufficiently close to, but below 2%, within our projection horizon, and such convergence has been consistently reflected in underlying inflation dynamics. Together with the substantial monetary policy stimulus already in place, these measures will support liquidity and funding conditions and help to preserve the smooth provision of credit to the real economy. At the same time, in the current rapidly evolving economic environment, the Governing Council remains fully committed to doing everything necessary within its mandate to support all citizens of the euro area through this extremely challenging time. This applies first and foremost to our role in ensuring that our monetary policy is transmitted to all parts of the economy and to all jurisdictions in the pursuit of our price stability mandate. We are therefore fully prepared to increase the size of the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Programme and adjust its composition by as much as necessary and for as long as needed. In any case, the Governing Council stands ready to adjust all of its instruments as appropriate to ensure that inflation moves towards its aim in a sustained manner in line with its commitment to symmetry. Let me now explain our assessment in greater detail, starting with the economic analysis. The latest economic indicators and survey results covering the period since the coronavirus spread to the euro area have shown an unprecedented decline, pointing to a significant contraction in euro area economic activity and to rapidly deteriorating labour markets. The coronavirus pandemic and the associated containment measures have severely affected the manufacturing and the service sectors, taking a toll on the productive capacity of the euro area economy and on domestic demand. In the first quarter of 2020, which was only partially affected by the spread of the coronavirus, euro area real GDP decreased by 3.8%, quarter on quarter, reflecting the impact of the lockdown measures in the final weeks of the quarter. The sharp downturn in economic activity in April suggests that the impact is likely to be even more severe in the second quarter. Looking beyond the immediate disruption stemming from the coronavirus pandemic, euro area growth is expected to resume as the containment measures are gradually lifted, supported by favourable financing conditions, the euro area fiscal stance, and a resumption in global activity. Given the highly uncertain duration of the pandemic, the likely extent of and duration of the imminent recession and the subsequent recovery are difficult to predict. However, without preempting the forthcoming Eurosystem staff macroeconomic projections, which will be published in June, growth scenarios produced by ECB staff suggest that euro area GDP could fall by between 5% and 12% this year, followed by a recovery and normalization of growth in subsequent years. The extent of the contraction may be partially offset by upward pressures related to supply disruptions. Market-based indicators M1, encompassing the most liquid forms of money, continues to operations stood at 5.4% in March after 3% in February. These developments are also clearly visible in the results of the Euro area bank lending survey for the first quarter of 2020, which indicate a surge in firms' demand for loans and for drawing on credit lines to meet liquidity needs for working capital, while financing needs for fixed investment declined. Demand for loans to households for house purchase increased less than in previous quarter. Credit standards for loans to firms tightened slightly, while credit standards for loans to households tightened more strongly. In both cases, this was related to the deterioration in the economic outlook and a decline in the creditworthiness of firms and households. At the same time, banks expect an easing of credit standards for loans to firms in the second quarter of 2020. Our policy measures, in particular the more favorable terms for TLTRO III operations and the collateral easing measures, should encourage banks to extend loans to all private sector entities. Together with the credit support measures adopted by national governments and European institutions, they support ongoing access to financing, including for those most affected by the ramifications of the coronavirus pandemic. To sum up, a cross-check of the outcome of the economic analysis with the signals coming from the monetary analysis confirmed that an ample degree of monetary accommodation is necessary for the robust convergence of inflation to levels that are below but close to 2% over the medium term. Regarding fiscal policy, an ambitious and coordinated fiscal stance is critical in view of the sharp contraction in the euro area economy. Measures taken should, as much as possible, be targeted and temporary in nature in response to the pandemic emergency. We welcome the endorsement by the European Council of the Eurogroup agreement on the 3 safety nets for workers, businesses and sovereigns, amounting to a package worth 540 billion euros. At the same time, the Governing Council urges further strong and timely efforts to prepare and support the recovery. In this regard, we welcome the European Council agreement to work towards establishing a recovery fund dedicated to dealing with this unprecedented crisis. We will very shortly take your questions. But before that, on behalf of the entire Eurosystem and all members of the ECB, I would like to acknowledge once more that this is a global health crisis and that the highest priority has to go to trying to save lives and prevent the spread of the disease. Since our last press conference on March the 12th, it's about 3 additional million people who have been infected by coronavirus, and a third of them in the euro area. And while it is heartening to see the curve of death flattening, as you've heard many times, we must remember that each death is a tragedy for those who stay, and we would like to express our sympathy and our condolences to all those who are suffering those deaths. And we would like to also express our gratitude, deep gratitude, to all those, from doctors to nurses to ambulance drivers, and all those who actually are on the front line of this fight against the virus, and who risk their life. As I told you, those are very strange and uncertain times, And it is in a way demonstrated by the absence of Vice President de Guindos next to me. Vice President de Guindos is with us online. We have been operating in split teams, and therefore we do not see each other, we do not contact each other, and he is with us on the phone. If there are questions directed to him, he will be able to take them whenever it's convenient, but he's with us. With that, we're going to operate also in a strange way. The room is not like any room that we've had in press conferences before. It's empty. So you are all online, and I know that you are submitting questions, or you will be submitting questions in relation to the Governing Council that has just concluded. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that, we will start with the first question going to Mr. Balazs Karani from Reuters.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my question. First one is about the asset purchases. I wanted to know if you discussed changing the composition or the pace of the asset purchases. Most particularly, I'm interested in whether you discussed including junk-rated debt in APP. The second question is about OMT, and whether you see OMT as an appropriate tool in the current crisis for some of the countries. Do you think a blanket ESM program for all of the Eurozone, as floated by some, would be a viable solution? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your two pointed questions. You know, I'm going to take the opportunity of this first question to take you back a little bit to the last 2 days that we've had with Governing Council members. And I also want to take this opportunity to walk you through the masses of changes that the Eurosystem and the ECBs together have decided, and for most of them actually now implemented in the last few weeks. So in terms of the current situation, we are facing an economic contraction of a magnitude and speed that is unprecedented in recent history. The spread of the coronavirus and the associated containment measures have literally halted economic activity to a large extent across the globe. And we're seeing a rapid evolution of the economic effects of the necessary containment measures in our area. Initially, there were only some sectors that were badly affected. We were talking about transportation, we were talking about tourism, we were talking about entertainment. And gradually, as the containment measures took hold, entire sectors of the economy, to a large extent, were simply shut down. And it's reflected, and it will continue to be reflected. The hard numbers are just beginning to come. We just had a few numbers from the first quarter. And frankly, our forecast for the second quarter in our severe scenario points to minus 15% on a quarterly basis. Consumer business sentiment indicators are in free fall, while labor market conditions have deteriorated massively. If you look at the PMI composite, for instance, in April, 13.5%. And it comes from 29.7 in March, and before that, 51.6 in February. And that decline, which is also quite remarkable and explains quite a lot of things, was driven by the manufacturing sector, but very much so by the service sector as well. The European Commission flash consumer confidence also dropped to minus 27.7%. And if you look at labor forces, it is now more than 718,000 companies in Germany that have applied for the short-term special work program. In France, the number of companies that have applied for the chômage partiel, the unemployment special schemes, went from 24,000 to 425,000, covering over 10 million employees. And in Italy, it's more than 4.6 million employees that are covered. And we do not still have clarity about the course of the pandemic and the duration and the degree of remaining containment measures that will be taken, which of course is critical for us to actually take an assessment of what the economic situation will be. It makes our job of forecasting and all those who are trying to forecast around the world extremely difficult. As I said, our growth scenarios on an annual basis, from the mild to the more severe, vary from 5 to 12% negative, depending on the containment measures that are taken. Now, of course, as and when the containment measures are lifted, we expect a recovery in economic activity, but we cannot tell at what speed and what will be the scale of it. Now, let me now turn to the number of measures that we have taken since March. All those measures are aimed at, number one, ensuring ample liquidity conditions. Number two, protecting the smooth flow of credit to business and a household, and preserving highly accommodative financing conditions. So those are the three goals we're pursuing. And there are pandemic emergency purchase program, 750 billion euros, combined with our increased APP decided on the 12th of March, 120 billion euros, combined with our monthly purchases of 20 billion monthly euros, we have over 1 trillion euros that we can deploy and use until the end of the year to purchase assets. Our new targeted lending facility provides for around 3 trillion euros in liquidity to banks at a negative rate. And this rate can be significantly below our policy rate. Third, we have also significantly eased our collateral rules to ensure that banks can continue to make use of the refinancing facilities, ensuring that our monetary policy tools remain effective even in times of severe financial market stress and against the backdrop of looming rating downgrades. So these measures altogether form a really powerful package and are providing crucial support to the euro area economy, notably to those sectors most exposed to the crisis. And I will tell you, as the economic situation is evolving rapidly, we are constantly monitoring the situation and evaluating each of those measures as standalones and as part of the package to test whether they are still properly calibrated and sized appropriately. And in light of this, and with the view to further ease the conditions for banks to provide credit to the real economy, we decided to take further action today. So we eased the conditions of our TLTRO3. What did we do? We reduced the interest rates for the period from June 20 to June 21 by a further 25 basis points. The rate in TLTRO3 can now be as low as minus 1 percentage point, -1 percentage point. We also decided to create a new instrument that we call PELTRO, the Pandemic Emergency Long-Term Refinancing Operation, which is intended to support liquidity conditions to the entire euro area, to the entire financial system, to contribute to preserving the smooth functioning of money markets by providing effectively a liquidity backstop. And these operations will be carried out at fixed rate tender procedures with full allotment at an interest rate that will be 25 basis points below the average main refinancing operation rate, or MRO. The Governing Council, and we discussed that over the last 2 days, is more determined than ever to strengthen its commitment to ensure supportive financial conditions across all sectors and countries so that they can absorb this unprecedented shock that we are experiencing. And with this in mind, we will make full use of the flexibility that is embedded in PEP and in other components of our policy toolkit to ensure that our monetary policy stance reaches all sectors and countries in the same manner. I'm saying all that to you to address your questions, because as one of the decisions that we made and that I just commented, we decided to enlarge the pool of collaterals by effectively freezing ratings where they were on April the 7th. We provided for a floor, which is at CQS5, but that gives a large pool from which banks can actually draw in order to get financing. We did not discuss the APP, but let me remind you that, again, we are fully flexible. We will look at all options. We will determine and monitor, and we will make sure that our monetary stance and our monetary policy transmission are both effective. Your second question dealt with OMT. Now, let me remind you that OMT was conceived back in 2012, and there was full publication about the terms and conditions and characteristics of OMT. And OMT was intended for particular country cases under particular circumstances, where because of fiscal policy or structural policies misguidance, there was a potential risk out there that the euro area be at risk and that it would be self-fulfilling. Those were the days. We're no longer facing that situation. We're facing a situation where it's not a single country, but it's all countries, where it's a global shock that applies in a very symmetric way. So the best tool that we have in our toolbox is indeed the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program, PEP. Now, of course, OMT remains part of the toolbox, and we're not suggesting that we would eliminate OMT. But for the crisis we're going through at the moment, PEP is clearly designed to that effect. Added to which, the triggering of OMT, of course, is a matter for the Governing Council to decide. I think I've dealt with your two questions.
The next question, please, would go to Ms. Caroline Look from Bloomberg News.
Hi, good afternoon. President Lagarde, just to be clear, because you just said that the Governing Council did not discuss APP, I was wondering, was there any discussion about increasing or adjusting the size and composition of PEPP, since that's something that you mentioned the ECB stands ready to adjust, and it's something a lot of economists are expecting at the moment. And my second question is, what was your rationale for not cutting interest rates today, given that the rate on your new pandemic emergency longer-term refinancing operations seems to effectively act as a rate cut in the MRO rate by 25 basis points? Thank you.
Okay, on your first question relating to the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program, let me just remind you that it's a program that is a standalone, very exceptional program that is intended to address the issue of the pandemic. So it is unlike any other program, which is why it was targeted, it was temporary, and it was flexible. I remind you that the life of that PEP is going to be determined by the Governing Council. No, it will not end earlier than the end of calendar year, but depending on the length of the crisis, and this will be the determination of the Governing Council, it might be extended further than the end of 2020. It is also not the only program that we have. We have purchase programs, including the 120 billion euros that were decided on March the 12th, and we have our recurring monthly 20 billion euros program that is also in place. So let's not just focus on PEP, which is very specifically designed, but let's make sure that we understand the whole firepower that the ECB has available, which is north of 1 trillion euros. Now, on PEP, I just want to take you to exactly the wording that we have, which relates to the flexibility. But from memory, what was decided, and it was the fruit of significant discussions, all in the light of the exceptional circumstances that we were going through, we have very specifically the fact that to the extent, and I quote, that some self-imposed limits might hamper action that the ECB is required to take in order to fulfill its mandate, the Governing Council will consider revising them to the extent necessary to make its action proportionate to the risks that we face. So that's a very clear indication that if it is so necessary because our action is impaired by those self-imposed limits, we will revisit them. And you know that the legal act was published shortly after that, which distinguishes very clearly the APP holdings from the PEP holdings. We believe that we have to make full use and continue to make full use of that flexibility. And that applies across classes of assets, it applies across jurisdictions, it applies across time. So we will use that flexibility full-fledged. Indeed, we stand ready to revisit, to examine, and as is mentioned very clearly in the introductory statement, to calibrate and to adjust the size and the composition of PEP in size, in length, in order to make sure that our monetary stance and our monetary policy is properly transmitted. On the interest rate, you know, we look at the bulk of what we've done since early March, and we believe that between the massive liquidity facility, between the revised and much improved TLTROs, with the enlarged pool of collaterals from which banks can draw, combined with an interest rate that itself was already at low level, we have the combination as a package to actually address the current circumstances. And it shows in the results. It does show in the results. I think the bank lending survey that was published a couple of days ago is absolutely explicit in that respect. The way by which yields on many of the government bonds has evolved over the last few weeks is also indicative of the action that we take. We have used flexibility when it was necessary. We will continue to do so, believe me.
Next question would go to, please, to Martin Arnold from the FT.
Hello, Christine. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hardly.
Hardly? Okay, I'll speak up. Two very quick questions. One is a lot of economists are saying the ECB should just adopt formal yield control policies. What do you think about that? And do you think it is, do you now believe that it is the ECB's role to control the spreads on government debt? Thank you.
All right, the yield curve control policy. As I just said, I think the combination of tools that we're using at the moment enables us to operate across the entire curve and to actually deal with all maturities. So whether it's the short end, the long end of the curve, we are in a capacity to deal with the two key objectives that we have, which is to make sure that monetary stance reaches its goal and that monetary policy is properly transmitted. All of that within our mandate, and all of that with the ultimate objective of price stability. Now, clearly, we're operating under very specific circumstances, and the combination of those tools enables us to satisfy those objectives. As I said earlier, we will use any and all flexibility that we have in accordance with our mandate in order to make sure that our monetary policy is properly transmitted to all jurisdictions, from east to west, from north to south, to all sectors of the economy. And we have the flexibility to do so. So we will use it full-fledged. Thank you.
Our next question will go to Annette Weisbach from CNBC, please.
Can't hear it.
Either you're not speaking, there is a request from Annette Weisbach, otherwise we will hold it and next go to Ms. Isabella Bufacchi from Il Sole and then come back next, if possible, to Annette Weisbach. Isabella Bufacchi, please.
Thank you for this opportunity, and I have two questions. One is again on the OMTs, because the details of the new pandemic ECCL, the special ESM precautionary credit line, will be defined shortly. And the market expects that this new ECCL will give the possibility also to go and trigger or ask for the OMTs. Are there special details that this new ECCL credit line should have to trigger OMTs? And then the second question is more on Italy, because reportedly the ECB has been buying very heavily Italian government bonds through PSPP and PEP. Yet the capital key is still there and there is no reinvestment of principal payments. And in Italy there is a feeling that the ECB could do more, because you said that the coronavirus has symmetric in its impact, but then it has asymmetric damages. Is the ECB doing enough for Italy? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. On OMT, I think I've already responded, but I'll be happy to expand on that. OMT was created in 2012. Different times, different issues, and it was designed for countries, but taken in isolation, that were facing particular serious circumstances. And clearly, countries had to be subject to an ESM program, which had conditionalities. Those September 12 conditions also provided that the Governing Council would consider OMT warranted from a monetary policy perspective. There was never an automatic trigger for OMT. The Governing Council needs to assess that there is a clear monetary policy justification and objective. As I said earlier, OMT is not necessarily best suited for the present contingencies. OMT is in the toolbox, it is there. But given the symmetry of the shock, clearly the Pandemic Emergency Purchase Program is designed specifically to that end, to make sure that monetary stance reaches its goals, monetary policy is transmitted throughout the euro area, and PEP provides that. It is exceptional, it is temporary, it is targeted, and it's intended to be used with great flexibility. You just noted that, actually. We do use flexibility in how we use PEP. And on that particular page, I'm pleased to report to you that the Governing Council has decided the publication principles that will apply to our PEP programs. That had not been clarified yet. And you'll be pleased to know also that we will apply the same granularity principles that apply to APP, but we will publish on a bi-monthly basis. So it will be accumulated over 2 months, but it will be as granular as the APP. So that will give really good and solid information, but given the specificity of PEP, we considered that it was most appropriate to do so on a bi-monthly basis. As I told you, our aims are twofold, and we will not tolerate any risk of fragmentation. We will want to make sure that there is plenty of liquidity. We will want to make sure that credit flows to the economy, that our monetary policy stance and transmission are effective, and we will do so in whichever country needs to benefit from our determinations. But we are determined to use all those tools, and we are determined to deploy full flexibility, as I just indicated.
And we will now try to go back to Ms. Annette Weisbach from CNBC.
Hi, Christine. It's Annette from CNBC. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I have a very detailed question on whether you'd also think about buying junk bonds, not only accepting them as collateral, so whether you also grandfather, for example, bonds in that respect. And another question is just a clarification of what you've said earlier with regards to peltros. Would you also accept other country counterparties, i.e. non-banks, or is it just purely banks you're thinking about? Thank you.
So to your question, is the ECB going to buy junk bonds? We have not discussed any change to the APP eligibility framework at this point in time. For the PEP, I would like to remind you that we have already given a waiver of eligibility requirements for securities issued by the Greek government. It exists. This was also part of the multiple decisions that we made in March. And as I said already, we have been very, very clear, and if I need to repeat it again, I will repeat it again. We will not accept fragmentation of monetary transmission in the euro area or any pro-cyclical tightening of financing conditions. So, within our mandate and with these two principles in mind, we will adjust as and when needed. I think you had a second question, and that had to do with the peltros. Now, I don't know exactly what you wanted to know about peltros. Do you mind repeating your question on peltro?
I can. Whether you would also accept other country counterparties for the specific operations other than banks. Would you extend it also to non-banks?
You know, peltro is an additional tool in many ways, because we had initially thought that the LTRO decided on March 12 was only a bridge until the next entry into effect of TLTRO. We decided to actually put in place peltros to provide additional support to liquidity conditions in financial markets, contributing to preserve the smooth functioning of money markets by providing an effective liquidity backstop. Extending it beyond the normal counterparties that we have, the Governing Council has not discussed that. But, you know, once again, we are in such uncertain times, and there is such a threat to the economic fabrics of our societies that we have to be open-minded and look at all possibilities. So I'm not closing off anything in that respect, but we have not discussed it in the Governing Council.
And we will now move to Tom Fairless from the Wall Street Journal, please.
So, yeah, two questions. The first is, when you're thinking about how to, or whether to increase the size of the PEP program, are you orienting yourself to the scale of new government bond issuance this year? It seems like analysts are thinking about it in those terms, that there might be about $750 billion of new government bond issuance in the Eurozone. Is that a factor that you're looking at closely when you think about whether to increase the scale of the PEP? And my second question is that your measures today were really focused on the banking sector. Is that for a particular reason? Are you seeing any particular stresses in the Eurozone banking sector at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. You know, our PEP is, as I said, one huge component of our purchase program capacity. Don't forget that you also have these other components that bring it all together to over €1 trillion. That's one. Second, you know, we, as I said, will use full flexibility to deploy this particular powder in the right direction where we feel that there is a risk of tightening, and where we feel that we need to intervene to protect and preserve our monetary policy stance and our monetary policy transmission. As I said, flexibility means across classes of assets, across jurisdictions, across time. And in terms of timing, I also remind you that the length of the duration of that PEP will be determined by the Governing Council, taking into account the pandemic crisis time. We take into account all indicators that we can, and our purposes are very simple. Monetary stance, monetary policy transmission, appropriate level of liquidity, making sure that credit flows. And that takes me to the second part of your question. Our TLTROs, and this particular one in its latest iteration, that can go all the way down to minus 1 percentage point at which banks can finance themselves, is intended for the real economy, is intended for credit to flow to the real economy, from the large corporate to the sole entrepreneur and everything in between, because it is associated with threshold that banks have to demonstrate they are reaching. So in other words, if they make sure that they don't leverage, if they continue to have their full exposure, and that they continue to give credit to the economy, then they become eligible to this particularly favorable rate. It is not without consideration that we have reframed this TLTRO. So it's not intended for banks. It's intended for the financing of the economy. We regard that as an absolute imperative if we want the economies of the euro area to actually be in a position to resist the extraordinary shock that it is suffering, and to be in a position to pick up strength and to continue to exist and invest and create those jobs that are being that are vanishing at the moment. That's what we're doing.
The next question will go to Doreen de Moitzela from the Financial Telegraph.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Because of the COVID-19 crisis, NPLs are expected to rise. How worried are you about them being a risk to the financial stability? And my second question is that some ECB board members are worried that these crisis measures will take on a more permanent character. We see that some Eurozone countries are working on an exit strategy from the lockdown measures. Is the ECB also thinking about its exit strategy?
Thank you very much. I'll start with the last one, because that's one that is also taking a lot of our time and a lot of our concern. We are operating under a pretty much lockdown status at the moment, and I take the opportunity of this press conference to actually thank all staff of the Eurosystem and those here at the ECB who are making huge sacrifice every day to actually deliver, be able to be on the markets as active as they normally are, and all that despite teleworking, despite children at home and all the rest of it. we might be bankers. We're also taking the hit in the same way and having to face the same hardship on a day-to-day basis. And we try to guard against the difficulties that could arise from that. So we are looking at how, as the German regulations, prescriptions and recommendations evolve over the course of the next few weeks, how we can also ourselves make sure that we exit without jeopardizing our operations, without making the system at risk. I would like to actually tell you that those people who work in teams between various countries are also experiencing some tough times. So yes, we are looking at the exit options. What I can tell you is that because of the social distancing, because of the way we have to work, this return to normal, so to speak, which will be a new normal, is certainly not in the next few months. We are looking at way down and probably out in 2021 in terms of return to a new normal. So for the moment, it's going to be gradual and with two imperatives. The first one is to make sure that staff is safe, stays healthy, is protected. And number two, that we honor our mandate and we do our duty to the citizens of the euro area. Permanent character of the crisis, we certainly hope that this is not the case. As our macroeconomic team has forecasted, while the next quarters will be difficult, we are also looking at a pickup and at our recovery. And the forecast that you will see in June, I hope, and the scenario results that you will see tomorrow, because we publish tomorrow the scenario, indicate actually a recovery and an uptick in the situation in 2021. So we very much hope that it will not be permanent. And I hope that the European agencies and institutions under the leadership of the European Council and the Eurogroup will do everything they can in order to have a joint approach and in order to show solidarity to those that have been most affected by the current crisis. Financial stability, I would simply like to say that, since the last great financial crisis in 2008, the banks are in a much stronger positions. Clearly, many of them have made a very significant effort to reduce their non-performing loans and have done so. Clearly, at the moment, the point is to focus on defeating the economic consequences of the pandemics. But obviously, financial stability will remain of concern, and the SSM under the leadership of Andrea Enria obviously are looking at that from a macroprudential point of view. With that, I think we close our session.
Yes. There was one more question maybe from Mr. Jack Ewing from the New York Times.
The New York Times.
Today's press conference.
Yes, hello. Thank you for taking my question. I just wanted to ask about inflation in light of the decline in inflation for April. I'm wondering if you're expecting inflation to go negative in May, and longer term, whether you see a danger of deflation in the Eurozone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I highly recommend that you look at the scenario publication tomorrow, because they go into great details on those numbers. I'm going to refrain from making any kind of guess estimate of what we see. What we are certain to see is significantly reduced inflation. How much, how, is going to be very difficult to determine. And why is that? Because of the lockdown, essentially, because the price formation mechanisms are not in place. And added to that, simply the collection of data about prices is sometimes very significantly impaired. So I would refrain from that. I think, clearly in the short and medium term, we are seeing inflation expectations and forecasts that are significantly lower than what we had seen. The longer term expectations have not been significantly affected, but we are in a completely exceptional situation, which by many accounts prevents forecasters and estimates from having any kind of accuracy.
And with that, we will close today's press conference. Thank you very much.